on chapter 21 of Talisman of the Winds. And the title of this one is Fight for the City. So, Thoughtgull, you've gone running off again? Thoughtgull spread his hands. What can I say, lady? Shoppa Kalish asked me along to watch his back. After what he's done for me, I can scarce turn him down. She turned his gaze on the little man. Shoppa Kalish, if you had asked me, I could have let your whole troop to guard you. Thouggull is too important to us to be risked on casual ventures. Shoppa Kalish bowed. For true and certain, you could have lent me guards, lady, but if I had taken half a dozen guards along, the chances were greater that Dr. Gobnash would have noted our intrusion, let alone the working of my little charm. Thoughtgull was as capable as a score of guards at watching, to say nothing of being able to throw a whirlwind into the face of Dr. Gobnash when he arrived. But put all that aside for a moment. I did learn that Dr. Gobnash is up to something. If I had had the time to run the pattern several more times, I would be able to tell you more exactly. But it seems he's building a force of special soldiers. Special soldiers? Magicians? Doesn't it take years of training to make a magician? Lady, you leap ahead too quickly. There is magic involved, for certain, but they do not use magic. He has built a force of soldiers, built up of various parts and components, and put a form of life into them. They will be, I believe, near invulnerable. How many? Demanded Shinorio. I fear that was not as attainable in the time I had. At least 50, perhaps as many as 1,000. Certainly not more than that. 1,000 invulnerable soldiers? I said near invulnerable. They can be slain, but with great difficulty. Please don't ask me for specifics, weak points and like. I can't help you there. You know, Shinorio said slowly, there may be little difference in effect between near invulnerable and completely invulnerable. Once the men have seen the enemy take hard blows from the ranks in front of them with little or no effect, those men will be less likely to make the attempt, and soon your army will be melting away like mist in the hot sun. So then, Shoppa Kalish, Lusomi asked, is there anything you can do about these near invulnerable soldiers? Regrettably, lady, not much at all. Just as it requires time and preparation for Dr. Gobnash to make these warriors, so too do any countermeasures against them require time and preparation. And this time, I think, will not be granted us. So we'll have to depend heavily on Thoughtgull and the Talisman? Or are you going to tell me that will not be effective either? Shoppa Kalish bowed again. No, lady, I cannot see the Talisman failing to be effective. I do wonder, though, if Dr. Gobnash has considered this in his plans. The messenger knocked diffidently on Dr. Gobnash's workroom door. He was a junior among the messengers, and his fellows had seen to it that he'd heard all the horror stories and all the supposed things the doctor might do to anyone who might interrupt him when the wizard didn't care to be interrupted. On the other hand, one didn't disobey the king either. Narnish had been cruel and hard, but Dalthoria was vicious, punishing insults and threats that were discernible only to him. Not to knock on the wizard's door could well be construed as treason. The door swung open, and Dr. Gobnash stood there. His beige robes were neat and tidy as usual. The only hint of haste was that his skull cap was about a quarter finger breadth closer to his right ear than his left. He wore no expression, fierce or otherwise. Yes? The king is sent to tell you that the army of Ascos is approaching. Yes, inform the king that I am aware of this. My preparations will be done in time. The door closed. The messenger shivered. He was sure he would not be wanting to knock on that door without orders from the king. The doctor was not a comfortable person to approach, not at all. He had made no threatening gestures, but his expression had been calm, but still. Highness, I have the matter in hand. The wizard was showing a trace of weariness around his eyes. If you would give the orders, I would send my force out to fight. Your commanders will see to it that no one approaches them too closely, and be very certain that no one seems to threaten them. You have recruited soldiers? Confusion was apparent in Dalthorio's voice. Not recruited, but built, from various parts and imbued with a sort of life. They have certain abilities other soldiers do not. And you never produced them for an Arnish? No, Highness. For one thing, until recently, I had not achieved the requisite knowledge. For another, Narnish was never pressed so hard as we. And for a third, the making of them is very difficult. So soldiers were posted along the route between the workroom and the city's west gate, with special attention to the cross streets. The guards were, in fact, mostly an assurance. There is no one in the city who would willingly look at any creation of Dr. Gobnash, let alone seeming threatening toward them. The soldiers required to be on watch observed the sight whether they had wished to or not. They saw the workroom door open and a man step out, followed by another, and another, and another. Once 50 were in the street, they formed a column and marched away, as more kept coming out of the workroom. The watching soldiers wondered how 20 of them could fit in the workroom, let alone 50. And as for the numbers that continued to come out, that was downright eerie. Those strange marching soldiers merited attention themselves. At first they seemed only men, but then differences became apparent. The faces seemed like a mix of man and pig. The pig snout foreshortened into a broad nose, with boar tusks protruding from the mouths. The ears, again, were like a mix of human and pig, trimmed down more to human dimensions. The fact that they all wore earrings in a number of different fashions only added to the weirdness. The limbs were long, straight human limbs, though well muscled, and the hands were normal man hands, each right hand holding a spear slanted back over the shoulder, and the left carrying a small shield. Some of the soldiers who watched the route swore they could see faint seams in the flesh of Dr. Gobnash's army, a sort of patchwork effect, while others scoffed at that for a dreamer's tale. Outside the city, the army of Ascos saw the city's gates open, and a column of 50 infantry march out and deploy into a line. Are these Dr. Gobnash's magical soldiers? Yes, lady, I can sniff the magic on them from here. Shepakela should become a part of Lusomi's war council. A few had been angered at that. Most shrugged and said, if we have a Bataan ox driver and with a wind talisman, why not a little merchant with a knowledge of magic? Only 50? Demanded Quadrahuron. How can they be as dangerous as all that? Shepakela shook his head. He has more available than he's showing here. He is playing a game of some kind. A game? I'll show him a game. He urged his horse into motion. Come back here, Quadrahuron! Shinoros shouted. The young man ignored him, riding towards a force of Ascos men, some 200 strong. Destroyer's teeth! The older man swore and rode after him. The army could see the two arguing for a moment in front of the horsemen. Then Quadrihuron rode toward the enemy, and after a momentary hesitation, the horsemen followed after. Shinorio returned, scowling, to the war council. The 50 infantry shifted formation, turning into a short, thin phalanx, spear points projecting to hold off the horses. Horses shied away from those points, and the riders tried to shake out the infantry, because they were being held at distance of about half a spear shaft. They had little effect. They swept around the side of the phalanx, and the men in the flanking files turned to face their spears towards the threat. Horses and men were down now, but it seemed none of Dr. Gobnash's men had fallen. The horses were all around the infantry now, and the phalanx could no longer maintain an impenetrable wall of spear points in all directions. This meant that the cavalrymen were able to get a blow in or two, though little seemed to come of it. Shortly thereafter, the cavalry began to pull back. Somewhere upward of a quarter of their number left lying on the field. Their foe, it seemed, lost no more than 5, if that. Quadrihuron, carrying several minor wounds, was a chastened man. He sat his horse with bowed head as Shinorio scolded him. "Well done, young man! With our whole army watching our effort, how easy will it be to attack these now? You were told near invulnerable. Did you not understand, or did you merely not believe? How many of them did you manage to kill?" 2, perhaps 3. A murmur ran around the group. They understood the numbers. By the time they'd killed all 50, their army's morale would be destroyed. Besides, they had heard Shapakalish say there were more of these soldiers to fight. Lusomi spoke. "Shapakalish, is it possible that Dr. Gobnash hopes to have Thokkel use the talisman to the point where it is risky to use it again, then have all the rest of his soldiers attack us?" "Lady, I believe you have guessed rightly. The life these soldiers have is not the kind of life you and I know, and such free will they possess is circumscribed by the necessity to do their maker's bidding. They will most likely do as they are ordered, up to and including offering themselves to be slain. It is just a sort of meddling with life which has brought Dr. Gobnash to the attention of the Lady of Praises, who's asked me to help deal with him." "Will you destroy him, then?" He shook his head. "It is not so simple, lady. I have certain abilities, but among them is not the ability to wave my hands and say, 'Hangasterfaraz,' or some such, and will Dr. Gobnash not to be. I do have some little tricks and notions in my packs, things which should be of assistance, but I will require assistance as well. It will not be a simple matter, lady." "So, what will you require?" "In the first instance, it will not be so much as what I require as who. I will need Thokkel to assist me." "Why him specifically and not another?" "Because, lady, it is possible we may find these." He gestured toward the enemy. "Attacking us while we are doing what we must do. Another person would have nothing but edged metal to protect us. Thokkel has the talisman." She considered that, then nodded. "For my part, I agree, but I will not command Thokkel to go into danger. Thokkel, the choice is yours." He grinned. "Ah, then I have your permission to go running off this time?" "Yes, scoundrel, you have my permission. You also have my royal command to come back again." "Without fail, most royal lady of Askos. Come, Shapakalish, quickly, before she changes her mind." Shapakalish led the party of 3, including the mule, out toward the place where Dr. Gobnash's soldiers stood ready in their phalanx. So close to the city, the grass was trampled down, and a maze of paths and charred lumps showed where rough buildings outside the city walls had been destroyed to deny besiegers either cover or building material for siege engines. At somewhere close to a short bow shot, Shapakalish stopped and began digging in the mule's pack. "Now where has it got to? It ought to be... Ah, here!" He reached his arm into the pack so deeply that it seemed to Thokkel that he must be reaching into the very belly of the mule herself. He pulled out what seemed to be a large copper ring. Here, now, hold this end. The copper ring turned out to be a coil of copper wire, with a small blue ceramic bead at each end. Now the idea is to stretch this out straight, so they have to they have to cross it to get to us. Ideally, we'll avoid getting so close that they divide to chase us down. Listen carefully. I'll call you when it's time to set this thing down. After that, we go back here quickly, so that even if they do chase after us, they'll have to cross the wire to do so. You understand? Yes. Carry this wire down and drop it when you say so, and run back as though Morker Deathlord were on my heels. So they carried the wire, Thokkel walking at a medium quick pace, Shapikalish moving at a near run. After a bit, Thokkel began to wonder how close they were to come. The various features, broad flat noses, boar tusks, and ears all became distinguishable, as did the fact that some of these faces were turned toward him, staring at him with an expression that could not be described as curiosity. Shapikalish's call came just as a pair of soldiers at this end broke ranks to stride toward Thokkel, while another pair went for Shapikalish. Not even attempting to return to its coil, he set out at a run toward the mule. He arrived there and turned to see Shapikalish still rushing in his direction, short legs moving quickly. The two warriors who had come after Thokkel were sprawled on the ground, where the wire lay, invisible at this distance. The other pair, who had been after Shapikalish, were sprawled at the other end, in line with the first two. Shapikalish came puffing up. "Some people," he gasped, "have an unreasonably unfair advantage in having legs long as trees." Now what? We hope they're stupid enough to charge across that wire, having seen what's done to those four? Well, if you'll give me a moment to catch my breath. Shapikalish rooted in the mule's pack and pulled out his crossbow. It's not so much a matter of their being stupid as it is in overcoming what they possess in the way of good sense. He cocked the crossbow. You see, they are made to attack and fight, and might well be pushed into an attack where they might not ought to attack, or they perhaps ought not to attack. He aimed the crossbow and squeezed the trigger. The bolt left the crossbow in a blur. The bow left the crossbow in a blur, and suddenly appeared in the chest of one of the soldiers. A human soldier would have dropped where he stood with such a wound, but not so here. Several of them looked from the bolt in their companion's chest to where Thokkel and Shapikalish stood, as though trying to connect the two desperate elements. You're sure they're not completely stupid? Shapikalish, cocking his crossbow, looked up at him and snorted. They're not stupid. It's only that their minds don't work the same way as yours or mine. We'll have to go closer. And if they can take a crossbow bolt and keep coming, I think I'd best be ready with the talisman. Just don't use it until they cross the wire. You mean some of them might? It's possible. I think it's sufficiently powerful to be able to deal with this lot, but there are so many uncertainties. There are? How many of them are likely to cross? 20? 30? No, not that many. I really have no way of knowing. Now hush. He aimed the crossbow and shot again. The bolt zipped across the short distance and was suddenly stuck in the warrior's chest next to the first one. This time they did realize what was happening. Thokkel heard a mutter of sound from the ranks, then a shout. And then they were coming, like a boulder rolling downhill and looking unstoppable. He was about to use the talisman when the first rank crossed the line, across the wire and sprawled out without a sound. The second rank followed, stumbled, continued another pace, and dropped. The last rank followed and stumbled, though only a few fell at once. The rest continued, converging on the two, with more falling all the time, until at last there was only one, coming on at a shambling run, as though effect of the wire had partially stunned him. It seemed a little wasteful to Thotkel to use a talisman on one single soldier, and that a man staggering with the effect of Shapakalish's magic wire, so he pulled his ox goad free. The warrior thrust with a spear, which Thotkel parried, then swung a return blow at the warrior's face. Whatever the magic wire's effect, he was still quick enough to pull his head back. The spear thrust again, but this time Thotkel moved aside and smashed a downward blow on the spear shaft with the ox goad. The spear shaft cracked, and the warrior, without a pause, tossed it aside and drew his sword. This evened matters out, as far as the comparative ranges of weapons was concerned, but the magic-built warrior was still quick. Fierce flying pig guts! I'd hate to be matched with him when he wasn't affected by magic. Something whipped past Thotkel. A crossbow quarrel sunk deep in the warrior's chest. The warrior glanced down, and in that instant, Thotkel moved in, struck at the side of the man's neck, and jumped it back as the sword swung. Without even a shake of the head, the warrior jumped. Thotkel parried. Fierce flying pig guts! That neck blow would have dropped an ordinary man in his tracks. Near invulnerable, for sure. The man struck again and again, and Thotkel had no time to do anything but dodge and parry. Then another crossbow quarrel struck, this time in the man's right eye. The warrior grunted and paused. In that pause, Thotkel thrust for his throat. The blow, which should have opened the vein in his neck, merely caused a sluggish flow of blood. The warrior grunted again, and Thotkel whipped in a blow to the side of his head, one that ought to have rattled his brain, even through the helmet. The ox driver was then forced to jump back to avoid a return blow of the sword. Thotkel paused, inching a bit to the left, looking for an opening. The man seemed to have little trouble seeing properly with only one eye, and he moved around with caution himself. Then, without warning, he jumped, whipping his sword up for a quick downward slash. Thotkel slipped aside and swung a stroke to the ribs, then saw his enemy's head jerk back as another quarrel glanced off the helmet. More than a little tired himself, and very wary of this man who seemed to shrug off deadly wounds, Thotkel moved a little slowly to take any advantage he might have gained, and found himself guarding against several sword thrusts. The next crossbow bolt took the man in the left eye, and he roared, not a sound of pain, but of anger. Still he stood, whipping his sword back and forth in vicious slashes from one side to the other. Thotkel, feeling this ought to give him some advantage, approached with care. It seemed the man heard Thotkel, or sensed him by other means, for he turned to face him, sword held ready. Thotkel, ox goad up, moved in cautiously. A step this way, the sword followed. A step that way, the sword followed. Another quarrel struck into the man's chest, and he stumbled. As quickly as he could, Thotkel lashed out with his ox goad across the man's neck. He went down to on one knee, then came surging up, driving the sword towards Thotkel. Thotkel parried and then thrust again at the throat. Having struck so many crippling blows, only to see them have no effect, he jumped back again. The enemy turned to face him, swung a vicious slash that missed about the length of a sword, and then fell on his face. Thotkel stamped a foot down on the back of the man's neck 3 times before he felt reasonably certain the magic-built warrior had ceased to move. He turned to Shapakalish. 1! And even with no eyes, still dangerous. So now you know what near invulnerable means. What a cheery thought. And what do we do now? Shout insults at the city until someone else comes out? Oh, I think we needn't go to so much trouble. There's another batch coming now. How joyful. Do you have any other tricks? Other useful tricks in your mule's packs? Not of much real use. I'm afraid it's up to you. You mean I get to be a hero all by myself? Oh yes, and if you survive, the lovely Lucy will fling herself on your neck and give you heartfelt thanks upon your return. Huh. Heartfelt cloud on the ear, more like. Any useful advice? No, only that Dr. Gobnash hopes to have you use the talisman beyond what is safe. Keep that in mind. More cheerful thoughts. Well, let's see. He looked at the band. Another 50 of Dr. Gobnash's warriors marching out the gate toward them. He pointed. Oh, north wind from the frozen lands, blow, blow, blow! Then the sudden howling wind smashed into the soldiers, bearing a freight of freezing snow. The magic belt men slowed, falling in their tracks, and by the time Thakal felt it necessary to halt the wind, the last of them were down. It's never had that deadly effect on people before. Shepakalish nodded. I thought it possible they might be particularly sensitive to temperature, but it wasn't something I wanted you relying on. Besides that, this was only another 50. How many more has he got in there? You're asking me? You're the one with the magical spying tricks. I'm just a blowhard with a talisman. Ever since our little excursion into the city, Dr. Gobnash has been holding a cloud over his works. That has an advantage for us, though. Your inability to spy on his work has an advantage for us. No. His using power to shield his works, and therefore having that much less power to work against us, is an advantage. Now get yourself ready. Here they come again. Another 50 marched out of the gate, apparently not all affected by their fellows' bodies lying on the ground, nor by the swiftly melting snow. Thakal called the hot south wind on them. Partly he recalled Shepakalish's advice about modifying the effect on the north wind previously called. This might allow him a little extra use of the talisman. The hot wind did have an effect, though not so drastic. Men began to fall, and though some of them rose again, others did not. Some did not fall at all. By the time Thakal was required to lift the wind, there were some 12 or more still coming, unsteady on their feet, but still coming. The picture in his mind of a boar-tusked warrior, both eyes gone but still fighting, pressed Thakal almost to the point of panic. Pointing at the remaining warriors, he called the whirlwind. They were almost too near for that. The whirlwind started as a mere riffle in the grass in front of him, but by the time it reached the soldiers, it was a large dark funnel, picking them up and flinging them aside. It was close enough that he himself felt the wind eddies from it. He wondered how those cavalrymen had survived the battle, and not only survived, but came on to attack him. Had those horses perhaps thrown them first, so they were missed by the wind? He realized he had no time for conjecture. He turned to Shepakalish. Is there any way at all, you can tell where Dr. Gobnash is? I can't keep using the north wind or the whirlwind. He is most likely standing on the walls, watching and directing. That takes no magic at all. On the other hand, the most precise position I can give for him is somewhere left of the gate. That'll have to do. He pointed at the walls. Oh, wild dancing whirlwind, come against the magician on the walls before us. Can it be directed so precisely? No way of knowing, but it had to be tried. At least he might occupy Dr. Gobnash, keep him from sending his magical soldiers for a bit. The whirlwind did seem to concentrate its force on one part of the wall. The Thakal waited as long as he dared before calling it off. A dark figure came falling out of the sky where the whirlwind had been, dropping heavily on the wall, rolling back inside. The gates remained shut. Shepakalish muttered something beside him. What? A moment, please. He reached into his pouch at his waist and drew forth what seemed to be an ordinary coin. He flipped it in the air and caught it, slapped it down on his wrist, for all the world as though wagering on heads or tails. As clearly as it was clearly heads, though. Thockel did not recognize the king thereon, and the inscription was some foreign writing. Ha! There was victory in his grunt. What? First of all, following your assault with the whirlwind, I felt the cloud over Dr. Gobnash's work begin to thin. Then I used this. He held up the coin as a rough and ready means of discovering if he were still there. Apparently he is not, though before we walk casually into the city, I would prefer to make some more complex tests. And his soldiers, if there are any of them still left in the city? Shepakaler scowled. Now that is a difficult question. Unfortunately, without the doctor to guide and direct them, they will not merely die. They may, however, he broke off as sounds of fighting came from over the walls. Well, there's the answer. Someone likely made a motion that seemed threatening, or one or more of the warriors attacked, bringing in more soldiers to help the first ones, which brought in more magical warriors. We'd best get back to the lady. And that is the end of this chapter. What happens next? We don't know. But we'll have a good night.